Today, I'm speaking to Paul Grauwe. Paul is a professor at the London School of Economics and has been a member of the Belgian Parliament. He has been an advisor at the International Monetary Fund, the European Central Bank and the European Commission. His research focuses on international economics and he's one of the leading experts on the political economy of the European Union.
It's a pleasure. Paul Grauwe and I go quite a while back, and he is indeed somebody I asked explicitly for advice on this crazy idea of going to politics. We must be the only two people who are LSE profs and politicians in these different orders. So it's really great to see him again. I think that Europe has gone a very, very long way in the last few weeks. Maybe not as long as somebody very ambitious like Paul would like to see. We'll hear him out, but very far. If you had asked the lawyers of the Commission 6 months ago whether the kind of program that is now on the table with 500 billion of loans, of grants, and 250 billion of loans was possible, they probably would have started quoting articles in the treaties and found it impossible. The truth is, we are seeing Europe put together a very, very reasonable response.
Thank you for having invited me. I'm very pleased also to be with Louis back together, if I may say together. Yeah, it's a great pleasure to be with you, despite the terrible times we are living in. You asked me the question what my forecasts are. I mean, nobody can forecast in these days, and we just don't know, because we don't know how this virus will evolve and whether or not there is a second wave. All this is of key importance to evaluate the future, right? So I just don't know. You must have seen the European Commission forecast that came out, the spring forecast. They were extremely optimistic. I mean, this was like a real V recession, right? This year, -7 or something, right? Which is quite low, I must say. And next year, a rebound of 6.7% for, I think, the Eurozone as a whole, which is extremely optimistic. If that is the case, then we shouldn't have a webinar. It will go away by itself next year, right? Because then everything is fine again. So I'm not saying this is not possible, right? The world is full of surprises, but this is a really optimistic forecast. So I think we have to take into account a more pessimistic scenario, that indeed the rebound next year may not be as strong as the European Commission has forecasted. And then the question is what to do about all this, because today we are still in this deflationary spiral, right? The result of a supply and demand shock that leads to a potential spiral downwards, and we're all trying frantically to stop this. And up to now, most of the effort has been national, right? Budgets. The budgets are there today to try to stop all these dominoes falling, because dominoes are falling, right? And the only one who's trying to support this is governments, basically governments up to now. Now we have this very good news last week and this week with this new program that Louis has been talking about. I think this is quite a step forwards. I mean, it's something historical, I must say, because I had no perspective there that this would ever happen in my lifetime. Now I have a certain age, so but I thought, no, this is impossible. And yet there it is. Of course, we still have to wait whether the Dutch will want to give their fiat to all this, right? Because they are still entangled in this morality play where they see themselves as the virtuous and the others, especially in the South, as having been sinful, and therefore they should be punished for all this, right? This is still a very popular morality play that somehow has invaded politics in the Netherlands and a number of other countries. And happily, the German politicians have extricated themselves from this morality play that is really very destructive, right? If we all start doing this, then that's terrible, huh? But that's the way it is. So I think this is a major step forward, but I still have the feeling that it's insufficient, right? Because when you look at the nature of the collapse and the budget deficits that are now evolving, now we are talking about countries having 10% budget deficit this year, right? And if next year there is no rebound, this will go on. And then the debt levels exploding. And what I'm afraid of is that after the pandemic is over, we get back into a sovereign debt crisis, because some countries will have experienced higher increases in debt, have already high debt levels to start with. And so we have to do something about it. Now, the ECB, well, we have done something with the new program, which is to the 500 billion, I mean. But that's not going to be enough. The ECB, of course, has committed itself to buying in the secondary market, but that doesn't really resolve the issue of exploding debts. And therefore, I have been proposing with a number of other economists, I'm not alone there, and that the ECB actually should do monetary financing of budget deficits that arise from the corona crisis, right? I know it is verboten. Huh? The treaty says you cannot do it, but I always say, well, we have so many brilliant lawyers in Europe that can find a way out of this problem. Maybe I'm underestimating, but anyway. So I think that is my proposal. I think we can do it. It can be done. And it should be done, because this is really an existential crisis, and we cannot wait until after the pandemic is over. We get immediately into a new crisis, which is a sovereign debt crisis. And we can predict with almost certainty that this will happen, right? And we have to be prepared to do something about it. And I don't think we are yet prepared to do so. But for the rest, I agree very much with Louis' analysis of the problem. The paradigm in which we have been living, right? The neoliberal approach that has dominated EU policies over the past decades. Will that change, right? Of course, everything is difficult to predict, but it's clear that we are shaking up the paradigm, right? Remember, the paradigm was, well, one aspect of the paradigm was we have to be competitive, social spending is unproductive, we have to do austerity, reduce all this, right? And famous economists came out and saying that if you reduce spending, right, that is good, but you shouldn't increase taxes, because spending is somehow, social spending in particular, is unproductive. Now, that idea has gone down the drain, right? We now learn that a strong social security system is like an investment that we made, right? We made an investment in the past that now has a high return when you compare what happens in many European countries to what happens in Anglo-Saxon countries where there's no social security. One must say that, Jesus, this social spending was a great investment that now bears fruit. And we have to rethink all this, right? And I'm also quite interested, you may have seen this poll that was published today of UK economists, right? But the change in view. The question was asked after the pandemic, when we will have to bring down budget deficits, should we cut spending? Not a single UK economist said we should cut spending. If there is a need to reduce the deficit, it will have to be through increases in taxes. That's really quite a change in the paradigm, because up to now we are told exactly the opposite. All the programs that the European Commission and the Troika was organizing for countries in the South after the sovereign debt crisis had this thing, you have to do austerity, but wait a minute, no increases in taxes, it had to be reductions in spending. So that's finished, I hope. So that is certainly something that is going to be something that we have to rethink, right, in terms of our policy making.
Capital continues to be very cheap. Interest rates are very low. People who want to invest in machines, in artificial intelligence, in IT, etc. Labor costs are going to substantially increase. Machines don't get sick. Workers get sick. Workers need to be socially separated from each other. They need more space. They need more measures, tests, precautions, etc. So one thing that is very likely to the extent that this pandemic continues hovering around is that we would see continuation of the trends that we have seen in the past towards relatively towards an increasing substitution of labor by capital, an increase in IT, routine jobs being eliminated, people kind of relatively high, I was going to say, levels of structural unemployment potentially. And increasing inequality between the people who can work from their homes and people who can't and potentially will be replaced. If we were seeing already the replacement of supermarket cashiers in many countries by self-checking machines, it's to be expected that since the supermarket cashier is the person who's getting directly in the way of the virus, that we would see an acceleration of the trend towards eliminating them and putting machines. And that's something that I would expect to see happening in many sectors of activity. And as a result, I would imagine that automatization and substitution of routine jobs would accelerate, and that you would see an increase in wage inequality, etc. Those things suggest that in terms of aggregate demand and excess savings, the trends that we have seen over the last years are likely to continue. Relatively weak demand, relatively high levels of debt, relatively big inequality, relatively low levels of consumption. These are structural trends that are probably accelerated by the presence of the pandemic. To the extent that the pandemic rebounds in a V, and the pandemic goes away and we just get rid of it, then those things wouldn't happen. But any in-between situation where the pandemic is still around, I would expect those things.